part 2. Just adding a little more jury. So yeah, which is a great basis to start this new introduction, immersed in the old, but also making it their own for the series, for Interview with the Vampire. So, just a brief little information in terms of legal brothels that they have, which, so I believe Louie's family fall through some kind of financial ruin, and so in this point in time in history, it was perfectly legal to have brothels and sex workers. So he profited off of that. So basically, he was a pimp. But nonetheless, he was respectful of his sex workers and paid them accordingly. And but yeah, we'll get into that. So just a little brief history. Take New Orleans. This is from, I believe, what page is this? Salon? Is this salon.com? Yes, it is. So, it was legal. And here, quote, take New Orleans, future home of America's largest licensed red light district. In 1721, there were fewer than 700 men settled in the whole colony of Louisiana, a number which excludes men held in slavery. The French government sent 80 women to the colony by ship in the hopes that Louisiana's free men would marry these women and would refrain from having sex with Native American women. Wow, I did not know that. Many of the migrant women, however, have been serving time for prostitution charges in French prisons, and upon arriving in the colony found the sex trade provided them more independence than any arranged marriage to settlers. These women were followed later in the same year by a legal historian, Judith Keller Schaefer, described them other more respectable women, she continued. The French prostitutes as pioneers thing continued 120 years later. In the early years of the California Gold Rush, another raft of fabled migrants arrived in San Francisco. At the time, only 300 women called San Francisco home, according to the journalist Herbert Asbury in his 1933 informal history, The Barbary Coast, a third of which were harlots from Mexico, Peru, and Chile. The Pacific News printed a story in 1850 to announce the departure of 900 women carefully chosen from the back of Paris, and wrote Asbury to be sent to San Francisco, yet somehow only 50 arrived. It had been said, Asbury wrote, that by the end of 1852 there were no country in the world that was not represented in San Francisco by at least one prostitute. And they're good. Like, I think there's in this particular article, they go back and forth between both San Francisco and Louisiana, but I think it set a great location to embark in this new perspective on Louie. Which again, I don't think I pronounced his last name or character's last name. The series follows the vampire Louis de Ponte de Lac. Again, y'all know my how I pronounce is a little on the wonky side, but very French. And in fact, they've made Louis's character speak Creole. So he is able to speak to Lestat when they bicker and whatnot. But the way that they're introduced, we see how Louis is a businessman, an entrepreneur, has to deal with the customers and keeping them happy, but also not the customers overstepping their boundaries with them. And he has to deal with one incident in particular that's very grotesque. But also, I want to say one of the characters, one of the characters in particular that is in a scuffle, if we can say, with a major client who also dabbles with politics. And it just goes to show that it always stems from something. Once a person is in a position of power, they can feel that they could do or get away with anything, including whatever they're preaching about family values. There's always something brewing underneath. And so his particular lady of choice is, wait, I didn't get her character's name. Hold on a sec. Her character's name is Bricktop Williams, played brilliantly by Dana Gourier. I've seen her face before, and I said, why does she look familiar? And I was like, oh, she was in P-Valley. And I will link that somewhere here or in the description box. Please watch P-Valley on Stars. Highly recommend it. And she can sing. I don't know if she has Broadway background, but she is such a true talent and stands out. So basically, yeah, one of her clients, colonizer, as we keep slinging that word around, from Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, to this show, to a number of other shows, Lovecraft Country too. I will also link that somewhere here in the description box or in the links or whatnot. Because something about that time frame, which was incredibly heinous when it came to people of color, and you see it play heavy in this sets of episodes, which a lot of people had issues with, which again, why are people so, I get it, people are going to be faithful to their characters very much, like even Neymar, there were people that were having issues because they were faithful to the original character, but things can evolve, and especially when they're characters that are based on fiction, and these, and there's just a twinge, if there's just a twinge of possibility that this could have happened, why not let it have space and opportunity to develop and be creative? So, yes, her particular John, if you want to say, is into politics. I think his name is Fenwick, played by John DiMaggio. And again, he found himself that she was not the one. He learned that day to not overstep his boundaries. But yeah, you see it play heavy here, very much like Lovecraft Country, where you see that people have to still feel, people of color, obviously, at that time, even though Louie is very much a successful entrepreneur, he still has to play a backseat to his white counterpart and have to deal with people calling him, you sure got a head, or a smart head on those shoulders, for a Negro and stuff like that, that comes across very condescending and berating and superior, like still superior to him, and kind of like, even rubbing his head, and all these things that perhaps prior to his transitioning with Lestat, it was just a way of life. Even though he lived very well, he had a beautiful mansion that he provided for once his daddy passed. He maintained that home, maintained his mama, his sister, his younger sibling, and he had a brother as well. So all of that fell on his shoulders, and yet he was able to balance that out. Now, necessarily his personal life, that had always gone ambiguous. But when there's a scuffle because his brother, who is very, very much into his religion, I don't necessarily see his name listed here, but he did a brilliant job. Hold on a sec. Played here. So he plays Paul, Louie's brother, who has some kind of issue. I don't know what kind of form of mental health issue he's dealing with, but he battles with his demons by the use of preaching and religion, and played by Stephen Northfleet. Oh my God, there were so many incredible scenes, but the way that Lestat is introduced to him is when they get into a scuffle because he's, again, preaching the word of God to one of his sex workers, disturbing the circumstance, and he has to basically threaten him to, because you're ruining the business, you need to get out of there. Bible thumping with people that are there to sin, and that's it, peacefully. And so the way the aggression takes place, Lestat is very turned on by that, and he just makes, so he begins his hunt and his courtship for Louie at that very moment. And there are instances where now we start seeing Louis kind of, Lestat interject himself into Louis's life, even to the point where we suspect in the movie we get a lot of suspicions. There's lots of nods to perhaps Lestat and Louis have a thing for each other, but in the movie, in the series, it's very much confirmed that there's an attraction on both ends. And Louis is very closeted at the time. Who wouldn't? Who's going to be out boasting about being openly gay? But, and from what we gather, at least in the series, Lestat is open. Either he's bisexual or pansexual. I want to say he's bisexual. And he swings both ways, because there's even a small quote in the series where he says, "I like a little variety," from time to time. But but then we later see and find out that that's just not the case. He's open when it comes to his own personal life, but when it comes to his mate, like Louis, he's very possessive of him and is very extremely jealous. But yes, nonetheless, and the scenes between Paul and Louis, there's a wedding for the sister, and there's this instance where they're like tap dancing with each other. That's very reminiscent of the Nicholas brothers, very, Cotton Club influenced dance sequence that, incorporates pure tap. And I loved it. That there's an instance where he can turn off that mental health issues that's debilitating Paul, and they have this like rapport as brothers, and I loved it. This is what I'm saying. This is what we need. People need to really step away when it comes to certain things. I get it. You already kind of incorporated some kind of character in your head while you're reading these characters from the book, but sometimes things can be enhanced for the better. For heaven's sake, look at I Will Always Love You by Dolly Parton, and we all know how Whitney bodied that song. So even though we love Dolly Parton, but it was just this little twang thing, and then when Whitney gives it all that body yada yada with her vocal cords, come on, it made it 10 times better. So we have a more fleshed out Louis and Lestat and relationship between them both. How you can see his attraction, Louis' attraction to Lestat, weigh heavy on him, coming from such a heavily religious family. More so his brother Paul, but nonetheless. And regardless of what he's doing, leading a brothel, he still considers himself a highly religious kind of man, but keeping his preferences on the low. And Lestat knows that, plays into that, romances him, speaks to him directly, is able to hypnotize a whole room, freeze a whole room, and have this dialogue telepathically with Louis. There's just such incredible scenes here. And even the way that they end up finally consummating their relationship too. And that's where for me, I'm sorry, I'm a big True Blood fanatic, and there are instances there that I feel like certain shows and movies will influence other bodies of work. It's not a carbon copy, but even when Lestat has a little taste, his first little bite of Louis, he injures him a little bit, takes a little bit, but is able to kind of self-control, not devouring and gorging on his blood, and then heals him like Bill Compton did to Sookie Stackhouse. And when there's a little injury, he kind of punctures himself and heals him with his blood. And come on, all those True Blood fans were like, you see? And shout out to my True Blood cast members, how they've gone on to do other things. Rutina Wesley is in The Last of Us, which I am meaning to review. That show is also on HBO Max. And hold on a second. And also our Jason Stackhouse, beautiful actor who's played by Ryan Quanten, would go on to do Kindred, that's also currently streaming on Hulu. What I will say though is that I think the major issue that people have with this particular series is that because it's so in depth, we also go into the possessive side of the relationship, the stalkery side. Like when there's a moment where Louie wanted to be completely faithful and exclusive to Lestat, but Lestat like wanted to, indulge with a lady jazz singer, I believe, and he tells him, I like a little variety. So when old Flame is back in town for Louis, and he was part of the military, they had a romance when they were teens, and so I don't know necessarily how far they had gone. And Louis already become a vampire. We have instances of kind of that mirror each other between the movie, how Lestat turns Louis into a vampire, and we see a much more different version. That's almost near comical, but not like yuck yuck, but kind of like just has a different take on how he transitions into a full blown vampire. So when Louis' Flame is back in town and they have a little sexy romp in the woods, we find out later that Lestat was not having it. And so I think a lot of people are having issues is that it just was too close to reality, and people were having issues like that. Very much like Lovecraft Country, that honestly could have gone on to have a second and a third season, but it got too real for people. So the same thing kind of happens here. We see a relationship that is it's toxic. There's a lot of toxic